Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu. Today I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my repeat guest, Daniel Pink, who's a best-selling author, numerous books, TED speaker, lecturer. Anyways, Dan, welcome to the program.
Richard, thank you for having me back. I guess if I come back like 4 more times, I get like a free bagel. Is that what it is? Do you give like little punch cards to your guests?
Well, the first time you came on, I think I interviewed you as a lawyer, so this time we can avoid that topic.
Sure. I am more than happy to avoid all.
Well, I wanted to get your thoughts initially on kind of, look, we've been in this world of, we had a world of remote work for, 3 years in the pandemic, and now are we moving back to, inline person, or is remote work going to stay? Is it going to be hybrid? Look, you do so much work working with corporations. Tell me a little bit about what kind of your sense is and where you see the trend line.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that. I'm glad you asked that, because I've actually been writing about remote work for like 20 years. Mm-hmm. I wrote in a book 100 years ago called Free Agent Nation about the rise of, like, before smartphones, before social media, before even widespread broadband. And I said in that book, it's like, hey, at a certain point, we're gonna have a lot of people working at home. Mm-hmm. And everybody thought I was out of my mind. And so, I think it's one of those things that was held out as a promise for a very long time, and that promise was never fully realized, except this time it might. Mm-hmm. And what I've seen out there is that it's pretty stubborn, and I think what's stubborn about it, stubborn, I don't mean in a bad way, it's pretty persistent. Mm-hmm. Is that, for after 20 years of people saying, this will never work, you can't trust people to do it, this will never work, you can't trust people to do it, and it's too complicated. You got hundreds of millions of people around the world figured it out in like 4 days and did it for 2 years. And as they say, I'm an Ohioan, so as they say in Ohio, like, that is a very difficult egg to unscramble. All right, you can't unscramble that egg, and so I think it's going to stick around. Yeah. What I do think is going to happen, and forgive this very, very long-winded answer, is that I don't think we're ever going to go I don't think we're going to go to a world where everybody's on Zoom all the time. I think that's insane. I don't think that's how human beings are constituted. Yeah. But I think we're going to go to essentially permanent hybrid. And I think you see some signs of that. Ernst & Young, on the day we're talking, Richard, came out with a report showing incredible persistence in both remote work and a 4-day work week. Mm-hmm. So these things that pre-pandemic would have seemed outlandish are now, I think, becoming more and more commonplace.
Well, have you done a lot of research, or have you talked to a lot of employees about, the importance of, being in the office, or, having that interaction, the limitations of remote work, or, kind of what is your conclusion on that? I mean, you've studied so much about,
well, I mean, I've looked at what other people, like what people have actually studied about this. The go-to person on this is a guy named Nicholas Bloom, who's an economist at Stanford. And he and his team have produced a monthly report showing, a drop-off, obviously, in remote work since the peak of the pandemic, but still, people, in general, people who are able, and this is really important, people who are able, working at home, a couple of days a week. Now, there's some variation on geography, so and there's some variation based on industry, but what I see is that it tends to be very good for productivity, mm-hmm. and less good for creativity. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this is why I think that we're going to go to this thing, permanent hybrid. And what I've seen in companies that I've talked to in the last 6 months or so is that what people are doing is saying, hey, folks, do what you want, except we want everybody in here on Tuesday, mm-hmm. or we want everybody here on Tuesday and Wednesday. Initially, what happened is people said, come in, you got to come in 2 days a week, you pick. And people were coming in different days, so you lost the benefits. You lost the benefits of that. Now I see this. Hey, Tuesday is going to be an office day. Maybe Wednesday is going to be an office day. The rest of it is at your discretion, so that it's essentially permanent hybrid. In fact, to put a very fine point on it, my prediction is that we're at a certain point we're going to stop calling it hybrid, because we're just going to call it work. Okay, because we're gonna tease out some of these really important questions. It's sort of like, okay, I'll give you a homely example, all right, a homey example. I literally, like a half an hour ago, I was talking to my wife, because I've been working at home for 25 years.
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife, and the conversation we typically have around 2 p.m. What are we going to have for dinner, right? But here's the thing. It's like, okay, some days Jessica will cook. A few days I will cook. Some days we'll do DoorDash. Some days we'll walk down the street and pick something up. A few days we'll go out to eat. All right, what are we doing? Hybrid. It's a hybrid eating. We don't call it that. We just call it, you know what I mean? We just call it having dinner. And I think that's where we're going.
Fair enough. Let me ask you, you personally, obviously you consult with a lot of companies. You probably did that in person. You had to do that remotely. What do you find? Have you gone back to doing it in person, or do you do a combination? And is it as effective remotely? Can you do your work just as effective remotely as in person? What is your conclusion?
It depends on what my work is. It depends on what my work is. If I'm gonna talk about a body of ideas,
yeah,
and if I'm gonna talk about a body of ideas, say, I prefer being in person. I like that better. I think it's a richer experience for the audience. It's actually it's more satisfying for me. That said, there are virtues of the virtual. So, and I've seen virtues of the virtual. One of them is that for the organizations, it's so much cheaper. You don't have to bring 400 people to Orlando. You can reach people more widely, so the audiences tend to be much more international. I find, to my surprise, that Q&A is better. That surprised me, and I was like, what's going on here? And I think the reason Q&A is better is there are a bunch of things. Number one is that in the virtual thing, you hear from most of the Q&A, once you get past a certain volume, is people submitting questions written, and I think that's the key. So number one, you hear from the quiet people. You hear from people who don't want to stand up in front of 400 people and ask a question. So you hear from the quiet people. The other thing is that there is a little bit of there's a curatorial function that you can do, or the organizers can do. So a bunch of questions come in and you can sort out the best ones. Whereas in a live in-person thing, it's like whoever raises their hand, and so you don't have any of that curation of it. And then the other thing is, like, just having people write their question down leads to better questions and leads to less speech making. Where people get up there and sort of voice their opinion for 5 minutes, and then their question is, isn't that right? So anyway, to me, as I think about this, and maybe it's helpful to your listeners, is that I think you have to be very intentional about designing what you do for the medium you're in. I don't think that one perfectly imports to the other. In a stage play is a different medium than a film. They're similar. There's acting, there's a script, but they're different. And you can't approach them in the same. So I think that you have to just go in with the intentionality of saying, wait a second, the experience that this audience is having is mediated through this screen. We're using Zoom. Let's design the experience to take advantage of what this medium is good at and to mitigate the things it's not so good at. The same thing is in person. Let's design it so that we can take advantage of what's good about in person and then mitigate the things that is less good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, let me ask you about your most recent book, The Power of Regret. My first question is, you've written so many interesting books. How do you even decide what topic to write about, and how did you decide to write about this topic?
Well, I mean, on the answer to the first question, Richard, Honestly, I just pick whatever, I just pick what I'm interested in.
Hmm.
And I have to be interested in, I have to be very, 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 very interested in it, because writing a book or at least writing a good book is really hard. It doesn't get any easier. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Thing you really care about, and something that you're willing to talk about essentially the rest of your life. And that's not most things.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to, honestly, that's not, no, it's honestly, it's not most things. It's sort of like, you know, I mean, it's not a perfect analogy. It's a little bit like dating. Like you can go on a few dates with, you know, like there are a lot of people whom you might want to go on a date or two with, right?
Yeah.
But people, nobody you want to marry. You know, it's like there's a funnel there. And so I think the same thing is true with topics and ideas and whatnot. On this particular one, I think it was largely because I had regrets in my life. And, you know, I was at a point in my life where to my surprise, I realized to look back. That suddenly I had years on me, which was, you know, and I look back, and like most people, I look back and I say, oh, if only I had done this, if only I had done that, had not done that, if only I had done this in a different way. Out is that even though everybody wants to talk about regret, when I broached this topic with other people, everybody wanted to talk about regret. And as I looked at some of the research, and we have a lot of research on this emotion, I feel like sort of popular culture had gotten it profoundly wrong. That we were stigmatizing regret, and there are systematic ways to use this emotion, and we have great evidence of this. Use this emotion as a propulsive force forward to make progress, to get better at stuff, to lead richer lives.
What is your example of one of your regrets that you were able to turn around in the way that you're describing?
Well, so I mean, I have a lot of regrets. I mean, one of them was, I'll give you one that's really bugged me for a long time, and it's a somewhat peculiar. Well, I don't want to say it's peculiar. So I've had a lot of regrets about kindness earlier in my life, and they're a fairly common regret, and I'll tell you how I know this a little bit later on. But a fairly common regret that people have, which surprised me, is bullying. They regret bullying people when they were younger. I was really surprised. I collected a lot of regrets from around the world, which we can talk about in a moment. And I was surprised at how prevalent that was. So I have regrets about kindness, but they weren't bullying. I just want to make that clear, because I think that's some reason why this really bugs me. So I have regrets about kindness that come essentially from inaction, where when I was much younger, college, you know, early in my 20s, even early when I was in the workforce, I was in situations where people were not being treated right, where people were not being treated fairly. I was in situations where people were being excluded, and it just wasn't right. Okay. And here's the thing. I knew it wasn't right at the time, and I didn't say anything or do anything. And that really bugs me. I mean, it bugs me even a little talking about it now with you. I mean, it's honestly, so here's the thing. It's a good example of, okay, so we have two different things that you can do with that. One, I can say, which is what popular culture is telling us, don't worry about your regrets. Ignore your regrets. Right. Be positive, not negative. Look forward, not back. That's basically the recipe that we've been fed. That's a bad idea. We have science saying that's a bad idea. What's also a bad idea, though, which many people get caught up in, is I look at that regret about unkindness, or sort of passive unkindness, and I say, oh my God, I am the worst person in the world. I'm just terrible. I'm just a horrible, and I ruminate or beat myself up. That's a bad idea too. What I should be doing with that is using that regret, that terrible feeling, as a signal, as information, as data. Okay. And when we do that, it can teach us, it can clarify what we value and instruct us on how to do better. So this regret that I have, it's helpful if I just analyze it. I can, you know, it's a very, very strong signal. If you think about all the decisions and indecisions and actions and inactions I've taken in my life that I took yesterday, I don't even remember most of them,
Yeah.
right? We don't remember,
Yeah.
And so here is stuff that I didn't do from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, to some extent 40 years ago. Not only do I remember it, but it bothers me. That's that's telling me something.
Yeah.
And what it's telling me is that it's saying, in a way that I think other things do not, hey, Dan, you value kindness more than you realize.
Right.
And it's also instructing me about how to do better. So I'm trying, or I have tried to use that now, because I want to avoid that feeling in the future. So I'll be in situations where it could be small things, where I'm in a meeting and it's very clear that someone isn't talking because they don't feel heard, because they feel like they're not being taken seriously. And I will make an effort to say, Jamie, what do you think? But in even other kinds of things where people are, if I see people being mistreated, I now try to push past the awkwardness and speak up and try to stop it. If you see, this is mundane too, Rich, I don't want to paint myself as a saint, but even things like, if I'm in a social gathering, sometimes you see in social gathering, there'll be like a scrum of people talking, but then inevitably there are going to be some people who are marooned, and it's very uncomfortable. I've been, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what I will do is I will actually affirmatively try to bring them in again. And so I forgive that long-winded answer, but it's like that to me is a healthy processing of a regret. You don't ignore it. You don't wallow in it. You listen to it because it clarifies what you care about, and it teaches you how to do better in the future.
Now, did that kind of, therapy or whatever, the answer to that, did that occur to you and then you wrote the book, or did you kind of discover that in the process of writing the book and you learned about how to deal with this regret? Okay.
Both. Yeah. And the thing is, it's an interesting question, both, because there is we have evidence, there's a systematic way to deal with regret. Yeah. And it does have echoes of things like cognitive behavior therapy and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that it begins with what's called self-compassion, which is treating yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Yeah. Recognizing your mistakes are part of the human condition, et cetera. There's some good evidence that disclosing our regrets, talking about our regrets, is a way to unburden ourselves. It's also a way to make sense of them. And then, I think the step that is, I think a lot of these steps are missing, but a step that's also missing is, really saying, what is the lesson I'm extracting from this? And how do I apply that lesson going forward? So for me, it was like, I sort of intuitively kind of stumbled to doing things a little bit better in response. But once I looked at the research, I realized there's a way to do this systematically that we're not teaching people.
Now, when you said you talked to a lot of people about their regrets, did you find that more of the regrets were things that they had done or things that they had not done?
Hugely important question.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the most important questions in the whole architecture of regret.
Yeah.
So let me tell you, so I did two pieces of my own research, and I'll answer. So one thing that I did is that I did the largest public opinion survey ever conducted on American attitudes on regret, working with a data analytics company, working with Qualtrics, who helped put together panels and things. We did a really, 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 really good survey of the U.S. population, asking a whole bunch of questions about regret, massive sample, so we could look for demographic differences, of which there were not many, which I'll come back to. Then I also did something called the World Regret Survey, where I collected regrets. I just invited people around the world to submit a big regret. And we've collected regrets from now over 23,000 people in 109 countries. So there's this giant database of regrets. Now, to your question, in that quantitative survey where I can actually make valid claims about differences, like you're asking, there weren't that many demographic differences, but the one, so I mean, you're a Caltech guy, so you can understand the math of this. So it's like I'm looking for demographic differences. I'm getting like null findings everywhere. Okay, it's like there's no statistical significance in anything. Then I get one, it's like whoop, completely the other way, and it has to do exactly with the question you're asking: action versus inaction, and age. And here's what they found. This is like the biggest, this is like I had all this stuff where it's like, there's no statistical significance. I spent all this money looking for demographic differences. I'm not finding anything. And then I got one thing that's like completely in the other direction. And here's what it showed. When we are young, say people in their 20s, people in their 20s tended to have equal numbers of regrets of action and inaction, equal numbers of regrets about what they did and what they didn't do.
Yeah.
But as people age into the 30s, but then into the 40s, 50s, 60s, beyond, it's not even close. I'm in my 50s. People my age, 2 to 1, sometimes 3 to 1. I mean, it's a close to 3 to 1 ratio of inaction regrets over action regrets. I mean, it's so stark. It seems very like this. Over time, people regret what they didn't do way more than what they did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess that.
Yeah,
that is it. How do you what do you conclude from that? How is what is your analysis of that? It makes sense.
Well, tell me, what do you think it makes sense? I mean, I have my own theory. I don't know. Okay. I feel very good about making that claim that the data show that. In terms of what's the mechanism powering that. I mean, I have a guess, but I'm curious what your guess is.
Well, I guess I'm just thinking that as you get older, when you look about your life, you can see more gaps in it. And when you see the gaps, you sort of realize, oh, there are these holes of unfulfilled things. And you realize, okay, these are the things you didn't do, you didn't try. When you're young, you're looking at, there aren't as many gaps. You're looking at more like a series of things that you've done, right? Think about building up your resume. Your resume is high school, college, grad school, you're doing things day to day to day to day. You're building constantly. So it's mostly, when you're in your 20s, you look back at your life, it's mostly just looking at a cascade of things that you've done and you're trying to do. But once you get into adulthood, now it's not like that. You're not, you're building high school to get to college. You're getting college so you can go to grad school so you can get that first job, grad school to get your first promotion, but then when you get to your 50s, well, you're not striving for that anymore. Now you're seeing, these holes.
That's really interesting. I think that's actually a pretty good analysis. I don't know if we have a right answer to this. I think that's very plausible. I think that a couple of reasons is, so I think that a reason is that action regrets you can often do something about. So if I've hurt somebody, I can go back and make amends.
Yeah.
If I get a tattoo that I regret, I can go have it removed. So action regrets you can undo. Inaction regrets is just metaphysically impossible to undo. You can't undo an inaction, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of them. The other thing that I found in that other piece of research where I collected regrets from all over the world, and basically these sort of mini stories of people's regrets, is that for certain action regrets, people will do what in like cognitive science and social psychology is called a downward counterfactual. Okay, so regret hinges on counterfactual thinking. All right, so you imagine a set of events that didn't occur. So you can have an upward counterfactual where you can imagine how things could have turned out better. All right, that's what regret is. That makes us feel worse, but it can help us do better. But you can also do a downward counterfactual where you can imagine how things could have turned out worse than they did. And we have a lot of evidence showing that downward counterfactuals make us feel better. They really do. They don't help us do better, but they make us feel better.
Yeah.
And so just to make it more concrete, so I have in this database of 23,000 regrets, I have a lot of regrets like this, almost always from women saying, I regret marrying that idiot. I have these 3 great kids. So I thought about the action, but I soften that by having a downward count. The inaction to do that. So I think that's part of it. I think it's complicated though. Between action and inaction is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, one of the beauties of this in your past books, one of the things I really like what you've done, Dan, is you're able to come up with ideas and themes that apply equally to the work and to the personal life. You're able to kind of cross that. How about this book? Is this just as applicable? I mean, are there situations that it helps in the corporate world as well as in the personal, or is this more for the personal world?
It's both, but it's a little bit more for the personal world. And I'll tell you, there is oh my God, what is it called? I'll give you the best example of that. I just have to look up what the acronym is. Give me a second here.
Okay.
There is, what does that stand for? So there's basically metadata. I don't even know what it stands for. I can't even find it. So there's metadata in books.
Okay.
In the way they're cataloged.
Yeah.
And one of the things is what's called a BISAC. That's what I was looking up. Okay. I don't know if it's pronounced BISAC or BISAC or whatever.
Okay.
Book industry something
code,
a category or whatever it is. But it basically categorizes books.
Okay.
And for both the Library of Congress, but also more important for retailers.
Yeah.
And so this is the first book I've had that did not, and you can get multiple tags.
Yeah.
And this is the first one I've had that didn't have a business tag. Now, so it is more about I think there are business lessons.
Yeah.
One of the things that you see, especially in the qualitative research, is that people have a lot of regrets about boldness. They have a lot of regrets about things like, I've got hundreds of people, if only I'd asked that person out on a date. Like X years ago, there was someone I really liked. I wanted to ask them out, but I was too chicken, and now I regretted it. You have people who regret not traveling. You have a lot of people who regret not speaking up. A lot of people who regret not taking chances in their careers. And one of the reasons for that, especially speaking up and taking chances in careers, is people don't feel a sense of psychological safety. I have hundreds of people around the world. If I go to the database, I can search speak up, speaking up, spoken up, just to go beep, 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 beep. And those kinds of regrets in the workplace are about not only about the individual, but about that individual's being in an environment where he or she didn't have psychological safety to speak up. So I think there's a lot of lessons for business in terms of how do you provide psychological safety so people can take chances, because we know when we understand what people regret the most, we understand what people value the most. So there's that. To our earlier part of our conversation, another big regret that people have are what I call connection regrets, which are about relationships that not only romantic relationships, but all of our relationships that were intact or should have been intact, that come apart. Somebody wants to reach out, they don't. They think it's going to be awkward. They think the other side's not going to care. So it drifts apart even more. And I think that the prevalence of these connection regrets show our need for love, basically, not romantic love, but just sort of companionate love, a sense of belonging and so forth. And that's why I think that we're never going to go fully remote, and that organizations that provide that sense of belonging, there's also, I've heard from readers, some business readers doing something super interesting where they said, hey, Dan, I read this book, made me a little uncomfortable, but what I decided to do was, with my team, is I told them, had a meeting, and I said, in the beginning of the meeting, I said, I want to do something a little different today. I'm going to tell you about a regret that I have. I'm going to tell you what I learned from it, and I'm going to tell you what I did about it. And that, according to these emailers, like that triggered this incredibly rich conversation. So you can do that. So I think that there are a lot of lessons for leaders in what people regret. And there are ways that leaders can be better. The other thing that we know is that when people process their regrets properly, again, evidence in social psychology, if you process your regrets properly, it helps you become a better negotiator. It helps you become a better problem solver. It helps you avoid cognitive biases, helps you become a better strategist. So there's some very pragmatic, business-oriented things here.
When you look at this book, I mean, I'm familiar with a few books. I know you've written many, but the To Sell is Human, which was a fantastic book, obviously, Right Brain, Left Brain, amazing book. What is the common theme, would you say, among all these books, or is there?
You tell me. I don't know. There's no what you're looking. Do you see some kind of gigantic master plan, strategic plan? Not at all.
I was thinking the point I made earlier. I mean, what I've always thought about when I think of you is some again stuff that is both applicable, very much applicable in the personal world and in the corporate work world. I think, I mean that maybe that was the, I don't know, maybe that's not deliberate, but I've always thought of your books as having that, you know, that feature, if you will, or your theme of your works.
Well, okay, let's I'll stop at theme. Let's call it a feature. I think that is true. But I think the reason that's true is less about me than about the world we live in. Okay? So for instance, take this moment right now, okay? I'm in my garage home office. All right? I'm wearing, like, basically I'm wearing running clothes. All right? I'm talking to you, but I'm enjoying this conversation, right? This conversation doesn't feel like work to me. Yeah. So is that personal or is that professional? Both, neither, yes, whatever. It's ambiguity. It's you know, again, I mean, I can make again, I'm not to pester you for being for going to Caltech, but it's like with you, you know, it's like shirting your cat. Is the cat alive or dead? Yes. It's simultaneously. It exists in two states. It's simultaneously, because I think that's the world. I think that's our lives. Yeah. And so I think the books are just really a reflection of reality rather than that being the product of my strategic intent. Yeah.
It feels like you learned a lot from writing this book. I mean, how does that compare with the other books you've written? I mean, did you feel like you learned more than past books maybe, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, this is the great thing about being able to write books is that you get to learn. You get to learn about something. So as much as, you know, certain parts of it are torture, it is an incredible luxury that you get to learn something. I think on this one, I don't know if I learned more, but I learned different things because I never really written. I think in the previous books that I'd written, I mean, perhaps they were a reflection of the, you know, sort of like more, I don't know, sort of, I don't want to say legal thinking, but they were really about cognition. They were really about the way we thought. Yeah. And this one is a lot more about, it's about an emotion. Yeah. And you know, emotion and you know, what I'm trying to, there's a tendency, again, there's a triangulation, like a lot of times, and I write about this in the book, it's like some people say ignoring emotions, they're not valid signals. And other people are like, emotions are the only received truth. Right. And my view is like, well, emotions serve a purpose. Emotion and cognition work together. Yeah. And I felt like in the previous stuff that I had written, I was completely over-indexed on. I said that retrospectively. I just did this because I was interested in it. But I think that a reason I was interested in it was that in the previous stuff I was over-indexed on cognition and under-indexed on emotion. And emotion is extremely important in understanding who we are. Obviously, who we are, what makes us tick, but also to your earlier point, how we perform and how we can perform better.
Yeah. So now, what about going forward? Now, do you have too many ideas that you don't know where to pursue, or you're actually looking for your next idea? How do you straddle that?
Well, I mean, again, those two things are not mutually exclusive because I have a list of ideas, and most of them, what I do is I keep a kind of a running list of things that I'm interested in and whatnot. Just a very, very long Word document where, like, I'll be walking down the street or I'll see something like, oh my God, I got to do a book about blah, 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 you know, and then I'll get it out of my head into a system. And then like 6 months later, I look at it and I'm like, that is the worst idea I've ever heard. That is just complete crap. What were you thinking? I mean, that's the most common thing. So to me, it's like you got to generate a lot of ideas in order to have one good one.
Is that a long way of saying you haven't figured out your next book topic?
That is a long way of saying that. There are certain things I'm very interested in. Like I'm incredibly interested in. I'm curious what you think about this for especially like legal practice. Is AI, not only AI but generative AI? Mm-hmm. If you've seen that, if you've seen these things where you give it a prompt and you say. I was showing somebody this the other day. just as an example, it's like oil painting of a operating room, realistic. You put a prompt into like, have you seen these like DALL-E and Starry AI and all that kind of stuff?
Keep talking. I might have.
Okay. So what you do is like, so this is for images, all right?
Yeah.
So, okay, here we go. Let's put it this way. Let's say that I go into Google Images and I put operating room.
Yeah.
Okay. It will retrieve existing photos of operating rooms.
Yeah.
All right. And that's using AI.
Mm-hmm.
Generative AI is when the AI creates something that doesn't already exist.
Yeah, I've seen
So
that.
you can go into there's the DALL-E, DALL-E is one. There's Starry AI. There are a bunch of these things where you can go in and I can do something like impressionist painting of operating room. Now, that might exist. I've never done a Google search on that. There might be an impressionist painting of a operating room. But what this will do is you give it that prompt and it has learned from what an impressionist painting is, what an operating room is, and it will generate, that's the key word here. It will generate a collection of images that have never been created before.
Yeah. No, I've seen
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
There's also this, but again, it's not only that. There's stuff for coding. There is stuff for animation. There's stuff for video. There's stuff for writing, where you can go in there. You can do like the first few sentences of something. You can do like I don't know. I'm looking out my window here, and there's a squirrel, and I can do something about squirrels are prevalent in the backyards of Washington, D.C., period. While squirrels are cute, they are a menace, always eating the flowers and whatever. But then I write that into this program, and then I go plus, and it generates new sentences and new paragraphs based on what I just said. It doesn't go in, it's not plagiarism. It's not going out there and lifting existing text. It's learned from this ginormous corpus of text what someone in those circumstances would say next. It's sort of the next evolution. If you look at like on our phones, you're texting somebody and it'll give you like, I am going to, and they'll say, give you a choice. Oh, probably going to say the.
Yeah.
The.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Store, because those can predict based on existing use of language, what word is going to come next. This is that on steroids that are on steroids.
Yeah. I did see that art thing. In fact, I saw an article that talked about how they had like a competition or something, and the one that was AI generated won the competition. So pretty soon you won't be able to tell which one's AI and real. I mean, that's where it's clearly headed, right? And then actually from a legal, I know you're a former lawyer, who owns the copyright to that photo? Is it the person who wrote the program or what? I mean,
there are huge,
there's lots of interesting.
If I want to be for all you young men and women out there in law school who want to be professors, this is what you should be writing your law review note about. There are because it's completely unexplored.
Yeah.
Is it a copyright violation of the artists whose work on whom the AI has learned?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a
derivative work? Totally. Yeah, exactly.
There are all kinds of really intriguing, really intriguing questions, legal questions. But
this sounds a perfect way to put your law school degree back in use.
Yeah, I don't think that the legal issues, to me, the legal issues are less interesting than basically what it's doing for creators, but also, more abstractly, what it's doing for our notions of what creation is. And you and I, are old enough to remember. I don't know. You might not be. When you went to college, did you have an electric typewriter?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I went to college with an electric typewriter from Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
And then, but while I was in college, like the second year, suddenly computers are everywhere. And there was a computer lab. I went to Northwestern. There's a computer lab at Northwestern.
Yeah.
And you can go in there, and there were like 12 computers on the entire campus, but you could go in there and you could basically like type your papers, but you could store them and you could edit them more ferociously than you could because it didn't require retyping. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing there ever was. All right. This like early instantiation of DOS and those green screens. All right.
Yes.
And so, but then just pulling the string a little bit, then these early programs, WordPerfect, for instance, for those of you who are as ancient as Richard and I might remember WordPerfect, they introduced these spell check. Okay, remember? So the first, I don't know if they called it spell check. That might be a trade name of word. But basically, like checking the spelling. And even then at the time, people are like, I don't know, that's kind of cheating. If the computer is checking the spelling, how are people going to learn how to spell? And it's like, and then you go further on and it's like, oh, wait a second, it's flagging usage. So it's flagging to say, hey, it's in passive tense. You might want to put it in active tense. How are people going to learn how to write if the computer, And so this to me is like the next iteration of that, So, and it's true in the visual arts too. I mean, when photography first came on, photography was like considered cheating in fine art. It's like, wait a second, you're not doing that.
Right.
The camera's doing that.
Right.
Look at these great paintings. Look at, like the great, around the time photography was introduced, there was this great American painter named Albert Bierstadt who did these incredible landscapes of the American West. And he would reveal them in ways that we sort of launch movies now. And like suddenly someone can come to that landscape and go, beep. And like, that's cheating. You didn't do that.
Right.
But now we all recognize photography as an art form.
Yeah.
So I just think it's a totally, I have to say, like, you look at that, to me, you look at generative AI and you line it up against like crypto and the metaverse. This is a big deal. The other stuff is like, yeah, whatever.
Interesting. Well, Dan, obviously I could talk to you for hours on this topic, but I really appreciate you taking the time. I can't wait to hear about your next book. When you finally figure that idea and write it, please come back and tell me about it.
I will do that, but I think the secret now is I want like generative AI to write it for me. So I'll just sit here in a smoking jacket and a glass of whiskey and like issue prompts, and then they will then generate everything on my behalf.
This is Richard Hsu and Daniel Pink. Thanks.